Hello, my friends. I'm actually now en route to cover the election security conference at Trump International Golf Course, but we have some breaking news that we needed to get to you immediately. There is the move right now to take the state of Florida, that the governor has always talked about as being the gold standard in election processes. There's a move right now to take the state of Florida and go backwards to where Georgia was in 2020. Yes, I know that's hard to believe, but that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. And with me to talk about this is Kris Jurski from the People's Audit. Kris, how are you, sir?
Excellent, Raj. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Kris, let's get right into it. This is pretty serious. Is it really true that Florida is looking to go back to where Georgia was in 2020?
Yeah, we've been all working together across the state trying to get new legislation introduced. And this is not our first year. I think this is about the fourth year we've been doing this. And we have a whole slate of citizens led bills directly written from people in the grassroots. And unfortunately, with Senator Ingoglia just introduced Senate Bill 1414 that on the surface looks like it adopts a lot of our language and a lot of the big points that we wanted to get done. But unfortunately, some of the big things that he has introducing will take us back to a situation which is much like the one that Georgia and Arizona are essentially fighting to get out of. And as this quote here on the screen says, it really comes down to Stalin's old quote: those who vote decide nothing. Those who count the votes decide everything. If you've been listening to Donald Trump recently, he's making a massive push in begging the states, not begging, but asking the states to go to essentially a single day voting with a paper ballot. And people have to really understand what that means versus the system we have now. I like to draw the analogy of digital and analog. If people our age basically lived through that, you probably remember the big old vinyl discs you put down and listen to music versus now the digital day where you can essentially create music or download music to your phone or your devices in a second. When you're voting, you really want to have a analog artifact, as they say. And the problem that most of these systems are now introducing and slowly pushing us into, Arizona and Georgia are a perfect example of that. If you have that clip of Sean Hannity, he showed one night how many duplicates were actually created in Georgia in the 2020 election. And there's really no way to tell if it's a duplicate unless you compare it to the physical paper. When you're dealing with a physical piece of paper, where you hand mark your ballot and you actually have almost like a fingerprint pushed onto that ballot for every single oval that you fill in versus a digital format, it's the same thing as like me showing you a picture versus the actual thing itself. And the problem when we get into that world is they are going to base the entire election on the digital artifacts, meaning that they're going to scan the ballots in, the paper ballots are going to get tossed away, and now the entire election is going to be audited and argued over the digital artifacts that are scanned. That's very dangerous. If we get into that situation, that's exactly what Georgia and Arizona were fighting. And when Georgia specifically was sitting there trying to bring forward the paper, no one would show it to them because essentially the paper ballots were irrelevant now. The law basically stipulated that the digital images are what was going to decide what happened during the election.
So, Kris, who is bringing this bill? And this is such a crazy idea of going back to where Georgia was. Surely there's no chance of this bill passing. So, who's behind this bill?
Senator Ingoglia has been working. We've been trying to work with him for years. I remember hearing from him last year while I was in his office when we asked for hand count paper ballots. This first thing that he said out of his mouth was, "Well, then Broward would cheat." Again, my personal opinion, I trust the citizens of Florida. I trust the citizens in their counties to pick who they want to basically vote. A lot of the digital and election type systems, they remove that ability for the average citizen to know how their election happened, what happened in their election. Any random group of school children can count paper ballots and check to see what exactly happened in that election. When you start turning this stuff into a digital artifact, you don't know if that artifact is real because it could be manufactured, it could be faked. There's no way to absolutely know unless you sit there and go back to the paper and count to see what actually happened in the paper. The thing about Georgia, and they're literally fighting tooth and nail to bring that back, is that what Senator Ingoglia's bill is going to try and introduce in Florida, which means that the election will transition to a digital digital image, and they're essentially going to look to the ballot images to audit and tabulate the actual elections. Another thing that's going to add some even more cost to that, because you can imagine once they start taking these ballot images, now every county, and I mean every county, because we have some small counties in Florida that are perfectly fine being able to deal with small numbers of ballots that they can quickly check by hand to make sure that the numbers match what the machines are counting. But in his bill also will introduce mandatory ballot auditing through electronic equipment called Clear Audit. Clear Audit has been introduced all over the state of Florida. It's a very expensive system. A lot of these smaller counties will be forced to buy it because it will be mandated by law. And again, why mandate something that is like a $2,000 or more device to count maybe a few handful of ballots every single time, even in the case of like small primaries that we have across the state and smaller counties? You're talking about that they don't need that. It's just an extra cost. Everything that we've seen from the bill so far really favors the electronic vendors, the election software vendors, because it introduces additional software, additional pieces of equipment that every county is mandated to purchase, where instead of trusting the counties to run their own elections and see what's needed to be fit. Again, digital images, I think, is probably the worst thing that's in this bill, because with that one provision, we will be right next to Arizona and and Georgia. Not they don't need the paper. Like in Arizona, there was rumors that they burned all the election ballots after the 2020 elections because they were essentially not the artifacts necessary for the election. The digital images were what they used to count the ballots.
Kris, two questions. President Trump has been quite clear on his appeal to go with paper ballots. This seems to be completely contrary to what President Trump is looking for. The governor also seems to be very aligned with President Trump, but it just seems like it's the Florida legislators that seem to be on a different song sheet. We saw that there was a showdown between Speaker Perez and President Alberton on that whole immigration bill. They pushed forward something that was not aligned with President Trump. Their bill got defeated, and the governor's bill is actually moving forward. And now it seems to be another version of that, where Senator Ingoglia is putting something that's contrary to what President Trump has talked about. So if you could comment on that, and also comment on, you said that there was a citizens bill that already has the good stuff without going to digital machine created ballots. If you could comment on that as well, Kris.
Yeah, I mean, the Defend Florida folks, as well as various coalitions across the state, worked together for years, because this is our fourth year doing this. And essentially what came out of it was a entirely citizen written bill, which was adopted by Senator Garcia and came out to be SB 396. 396 covers nearly all of what Ingoglia wants in his bill, from the good side, the things that we want. For example, we don't want telephone requests for mail-in ballots any longer. They have to be done in writing, either online or in person through the application, is a good example for mail ballot security. But a lot of the stuff that, like, again, going back to what President Trump wants, and the people, I would say, is because what President Trump is asking for is to make sure that 2020 never happens again. That painful situation of watching the people wanted President Trump. The people got their election stolen in 2020. And that was painful for all of us. And we all, as election integrity advocates, want to make sure that our elections are trustworthy again. And the only way you can bring back trust is transparency. And a paper ballot is the only way you can have a 100% auditable and understandable election. Anything else that involves software or electronic digital items, you always introduce complexity. And in that complexity, there's all kinds of ways for people to cheat. And really that's what it comes down to, is that, do we trust our elections? If you're going to move to a more digital type election system, you're moving further away from what Trump and the people want. Trump is asking for a paper ballot, basically what I mentioned earlier about analog versus digital voting. You want to be able to hold that ballot. And like I said, you can hand a stack of those ballots to some high school students, and they would easily be able to flip through those and quickly tabulate who basically won that, instead of having to trust a machine that you really have to trust that the digital format and the software was not corrupted, or somebody doesn't have something in the middle of that to manipulate the numbers. If you move to a completely digital format, how on earth will the people ever know that what they went into the polling booth and voted actually was recorded? We have a system that's called an anonymous vote, an anonymous ballot. There's no way to know that what you're looking at on the screen was what you actually voted. And we've seen it in Georgia. They have correction software that literally can move your vote to another person. And because it's a digital artifact, it can be done at scale. Meaning you can change millions of these ballots within a few minutes and no one would know.
Kris, it's remarkable what you're talking about. And it seems like this bill is against President Trump's mandate or request for hand paper ballots. And it seems to be going against what the governor's talking about as well. Uh, so, Kris, two things here. One, could you talk a little bit about the call to action that you'd like to have people take as a result of what's happening here? And for those people who want to know a little bit more about your organization, how do they get hold of you?
Thank you much. My website address where you can learn more about what we're doing is thepeoplesaudit.org, altogether, The People's Audit. And if you wanted to ask me about action items, really it's more along lines as invigorating people and begging them to understand the incredible opportunity we have right now, and also the window is shrinking. This particular moment right now in Florida politics is when the legislators meet, and this is the chance that we have to actually influence election law in the state. Come April and May, the state will kind of shift to more of a publicity kind of tour, where they'll be talking about the legislation that's already passed. And I'm afraid by next year, when we start heading towards the governor's race and things like that, the legislators will probably turn around and say, sorry, we can't change anything for an election year. So this is really the moment to get involved with election integrity. If this moves you, please call your local senator, Florida senator and Florida House representative, and voice your opinion about this bill. It's our opinion that Senate Bill 1414 needs to be killed. Unfortunately, we would much rather everybody support the citizen-led bill, which is SB 396, which is being run by Senator Garcia. They both have sponsors, I believe, in the House, so they would basically come to the floor to a vote. But we would much rather see that the citizen-led grassroots bill that we worked so hard on is the one that's being picked to basically go to move forward.
Thank you, Kris. I appreciate that. Over to you, Michelle and Ali.